Hello, and welcome to Mailin' It, the official podcast of the United States Postal Service. I'm Carla Kirby.
And I'm Jonathan Castello. Well, we're now full steam ahead into 2025, which means, depending on where you are, you can already start buying some of the new stamp designs we announced in November. The Year of the Snake stamps have been available in Boston since the middle of January, for example. And our new Love stamps have already debuted in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. Of course, those are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's in store for this year.
As with last year's Stamps episode, we've once again invited Lisa Bobb-Semple to talk to us about the Postal Service's new lineup. Lisa is, of course, our Stamp Services Director. This year, we've also invited Daniel Piazza, the Smithsonian National Postal Museum's Chief Curator of Philately, to join us. Daniel's going to provide some historical perspective for us to help us better understand what makes this year's lineup special. Should be a lot of fun. Welcome to Mailin' It, Daniel, and welcome back, Lisa.
Thank you very much, Carla.
Thanks for having me.
So, before we talk about this year's stamps, I want to share an interesting stamp-related tidbit with you all. Did you know that the Postal Service has issued more than 3,000 commemorative stamp designs since we started offering commemorative stamps in 1893?
I did not know that, Jonathan.
I sort of know that, but did you know that the stamps are kept in a cave in Kansas City, and in the evenings you can actually hear explosives going on as they expand the space in the cave?
I didn't know that either.
Well, I actually kind of did know that, yes.
I had a feeling that you absolutely would know that, Daniel. And of course, the purpose of commemorative stamps is to celebrate American culture and history. They're also very popular with customers and an important source of revenue for the Postal Service. Daniel, do you have a favorite that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I remember very vividly a sheet of stamps that came out in, I think it was in 2016, for the centennial of the national parks, with photography stamps in different sizes featuring all different parks from around the country, different landscapes and flowers and things like that, with an inspirational quote in the middle. It's just a very beautiful, unified set of stamps celebrating the national parks.
So, Lisa, how about you? Do you have a favorite commemorative stamp?
Oh, Carla, you're not going to get me there. I get asked that question all the time, and I keep saying picking a favorite stamp is like picking a favorite child, you know? So I typically like to say that I love all my children, i.e. all my stamps the same. I do love the fun ones, though, if I had to choose one, because I think they just, are so exciting and different, though.
I love it. And Lisa, as a way of introducing, or maybe in some cases, reintroducing yourself to our audience, tell us a little bit about what you and your team at Stamp Services do.
Sure. So I'm responsible for all oversight of stamps from beginning to end. So really from working with CSAC on the ideas that we get from the public and determining what stamp subjects with CSAC will actually become an actual stamp through the design of the stamp. And then I have a team in Kansas City that's responsible for the production of the stamp. So I oversee that. And then all the way through the fulfillment of the stamp, fulfillment both to the post office as well as to customers. And we also develop stamp-inspired products, philatelic products, off of those stamps. So I also oversee that process as well, too. We have two different locations where we actually fulfill the stamps, one in Kansas City, like I said, and also one in Dallas, which most people don't typically know about. And as I said earlier, SFS is actually in a limestone cave because that's the optimal location for where the stamp should be located.
And can you remind us one more time, what is, you mentioned, CSAC, what is it?
Oh, yes, sorry. CSAC is the Citizen Stamps Advisory Committee. So it's a committee appointed by the Postmaster General There are up to 15 people that can be on the committee, and they all come with different backgrounds, different strengths. So think of somebody who is an expert in sports, somebody who's an expert in history, in art design. So we really try to have a mixture of individuals to make up the America essentially. And that committee is the committee responsible for actually voting on the stamps and determining what stamp suggestions would actually become actual stamps.
So, Lisa, of course, thank you for coming back and reminding us about the CSAC and its importance in the establishment of these different commemorative stamps. And Daniel, it's good to have you on the podcast. You've been the Postal Museum's Chief Stamps Curator since 2014. Tell us a little bit about what that entails.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me on. I've been a stamp collector since childhood, and I've been with the Postal Museum for the past 18 years. I'm responsible for exhibitions and research and acquisitions related to the museum's collection of 6 million postage stamps and postal artifacts. The museum's collection and exhibitions focus primarily on U.S. stamps and history, but we have a worldwide collection, and a goal of the museum's exhibition program in particular is to broaden the appeal of stamps beyond stamp collectors. And so we like to think of ourselves really as a history museum whose medium just happens to be stamps and postal history.
And if you haven't gone to the Postal Museum, it is so cool.
And to that point, I know that there's some really cool stamps that are coming out this year. I'm thinking about designs like that are honoring actress Betty White, the latest in our Black Heritage series, and the start of the American Revolution. But before we dive into those, Lisa, can you briefly take us through the process of choosing these stamp designs for a given year?
Sure. So we get thousands of stamp suggestions from the public each year. And we really want to commemorate the stamps that really represent the best of America, our culture, our history, and our achievements. So we get all these ideas, and every quarter we meet with CSAC and review those stamp suggestions. And CSAC actually looks at those suggestions and determines which stamps or which suggestions would really be worthy of becoming a stamp. And they really try to make sure that we also have representation across various aspects, like a fun stamp, a history stamp, a science stamp, so that the program has a stamp that's really for everyone. They look at the pros and cons of that particular stamp subject. They're actually debating it, really thinking through like why that particular stamp is worthy, and then they actually vote on the stamp. Once they vote on the stamp, then we then list that as a stamp under consideration, and then we go from there.
So is there a ballot process that goes along with deciding the stamps?
Yeah, so we typically vote. It's typically an anonymous voting process so that you can't see who voted for which stamps. In case you had one of your favorite stamps in there, you don't get upset. And then the winner must have 50% of the vote to actually become a stamp that we would then put into development.
So it's my understanding that the process for choosing and commissioning the new stamps didn't always work this way. So Daniel, what was it like before the Citizen Stamp Advisory Committee, also referred to as the CSAC?
Well, before CSAC was created in 1957, the process was extremely political. It generally involved congressional delegations pressuring the then Post Office Department to issue stamps connected either to their state or certain industries in their state or events. And so the stamp program became somewhat lopsided in that regard. And the idea of bringing in the Citizen Stamp Advisory Committee in the 1950s was to help balance out the program and I think also to move it away from being geographically based and politically based to broadening out cultural representation.
If I could add too, I think that's the great thing about CSAC as well, because you have representation from across different, segments, if you will, then each person in CSAC can bring in their expertise, right, and talk about the pros and cons of that particular stamp subject.
No, it certainly sounds like the process is a lot more democratic now. Mm-hmm. It sounds, much better.
Yeah.
Lisa, what happens after the committee decides, on a lineup of new stamps?
Sure. So we essentially the stamp subject is voted in, right? And then when a stamp year comes up, if you will, then CSAC is looking at all of those stamp subjects that are under consideration and voting for that stamp to be in a particular year. It's really important, like I mentioned before, that we have stamps across different categories so that essentially there's a stamp for everybody. So you want to have a history stamp, a fun stamp, there may be a special, anniversary celebration. So they're really looking at the overall program to make sure that we have stamps across different representation. And then we then assign that stamp subject to an art director. And the art directors work with various professional designers or artists, illustrators, to really bring essentially that stamp topic to life. Once we have the art determined for that stamp, then it goes through a really rigorous, lengthy rights legal process. That's probably one of the things that surprised me most, is that we really do a lot of legal review and process to make sure that that stamp is really can meet the test, if you will. Once that's approved, and we have all the legal piece cleared, then I take the stamp to the PMG. He or her, the PMG, is the ultimate decider of that stamp. And then once the PMG approves the stamps, then my stamp production team works with the printers to print the stamps. Once they're printed, they're actually trucked and stored at both SFS in Kansas City and Dallas, and that's where the stamps are then distributed from. We also develop, like I mentioned, stamp-inspired products. So we think about programs, note cards, bookmarks as well to commemorate that stamp edition that's coming out. We really try to think about both the philatelists and the general audience as we're putting together stamps and products so that we're appealing to a wider audience of individuals.
So the idea of appealing to both stamp collectors and non-collectors is something you touched on earlier, Daniel, when talking about the Postal Museum. Why is it so important to reach both of these audiences?
I think that both of these audiences are interested in the stamp program perhaps for different reasons. Stamp collectors generally like the historical topics and those themes, where maybe more general stamp enthusiasts, are looking for the program to be relevant to more contemporary culture, to promote aspects of contemporary culture, and so having a balance of those topics, I think is really good. But whether it's an aspect of historical or contemporary culture, what the stamp does is really, as Lisa has described it, the whole process of designing it is very intentional and focuses attention on a subject that people might otherwise not have thought about, spark and inspire them to learn more about it. In the same way that an object in a museum like the Smithsonian focuses attention and gets people curious and asking questions about it. I think when an image appears on a postage stamp, it does the same thing in the broader culture.
Can you think of like one or two maybe examples where, really stand out to you that did that, kind of spark that public interest in that way? Where
the Postal Service has gone with the Black Heritage series, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, really embodies that. The success of the series in the 80s and 90s really led to broader representation of African Americans throughout the general stamp program. And so the Black Heritage series started to focus its attention more on people who weren't as well known, but should be and recognized. And so when a stamp comes out honoring someone and a customer, patron, the media, whomever says, well, who is that? It sparks that sort of interest.
Yeah, I remember the John Lewis stamp last year. I mean, that one was amazing.
Yeah. It was Beta Ginsburg as well, too. We did that one last year, and that, I think if people didn't know who she was, you got an opportunity to learn more about who she was as well.
Lisa, more than a dozen new designs have already been announced for 2025, right? What's all included in this year's batch?
Sure. So we have the Lunar New Year, which we do every year. It's one of our series. Daniel just mentioned the Black Heritage as well, too. Both the Black Heritage and we also have a Love series as well, too. So those are all continuing series that we have coming out this year. We do have, with the USPS turning 250 this year, we're going to have some stamps coming out around that. We actually haven't publicly announced that one as yet, but I can't wait until we do because it's a really cool design for that particular stamp. Next year, 2026, is the country's 250th. And so we do have a stamp coming out that commemorates that, which is which we'll talk about in a little bit more, the American Revolution. But that is one of the stamps that celebrates the country turning 250, because we do have additional stamps coming out next year. So we really wanted to jumpstart, if you will, 2025 with a stamp that supports that and continue that through 2026. We're also tapping into cultural stamps. So we have the SpongeBob, which is really cool, coming out. There's Goodnight Moon. And probably one of my favorites this year, because remember, I don't have an overall favorite stamp, is the Betty White stamp. We have gotten a lot of excitement about that particular stamp, probably because she was just so well known, I should say. But it's a beautiful stamp, and she really crosses different generations. The other stamp we have coming out that I want to mention is the Armed Forces stamp. So the Armed Forces, the Navy, the Marine, and the Army, they all turn 250 years this year as well, too. So we just announced those stamps coming out. And then next year is every 10 years we have the World Stamp Show. So it's the stamp show in the U.S. every 10 years. So we did announce the World Stamp Show stamp recently. Several other stamps to mention is the Appalachian Trail. There are also the Vibrant Leaves, Dahlias, and Baby Wild Animals coming out this year.
So, Lisa, let's start with some of the most popular series that are going to be released for 2025. Can you tell us more about what Lunar New Year and the Black Heritage series will look like?
Sure. So the first stamp was issued in, this is actually the one that's coming out this year, is the Year of the Snake, and that one came out in January of this year. It's the sixth of the 12 stamp series around Lunar New Year. As with last year's Year of the Dragon stamp, this stamp will also feature a photograph of a 3D mask. And then with the Black Heritage series, we just revealed that in February in New Orleans, and that is the 48th stamp in the series. This was Alan Toussaint, and he was a pianist, a singer, a songwriter, composer, arranger, and a producer. So he was actually very well known for his music, dominance, if you will.
Daniel, you and I were talking a little bit earlier about the significance of the Black Heritage series, right? And this series goes back all the way to 1978, I believe you said. What was the reason for launching that series?
The Black Heritage series really grew out of the National Bicentennial celebrations in 1976. And there was a lot of discussion around that time about who was being commemorated in this anniversary and who was being left out of the commemorations. And so partially to address this issue of Black Americans being largely absent from the National Bicentennial commemorations, the idea for the Black Heritage stamp kind of grew out of that. And it's gone on to become, an annual stamp series. And when a stamp series develops that way, one, it really highlights that this is something that the nation finds important to commemorate and honor, but it also means, for collectors and for the public, it develops a following. And you get people who look forward then to every year, the new issue. What will the new issue be in the Black Heritage series? Who will be commemorated? And the series has developed over time its own design aesthetic too. Very powerful portraits based on photographs, and a style of lettering that's instantly recognizable. So it's really, the series has, over the nearly 50 years it's existed, it has an identity now and a following.
And interestingly enough, it's actually, we alternate male and female. So every year there's either one year it's a male, the next year it's a female. That was not always the case, but that's happened the last couple of years.
That's actually very interesting, Lisa. And I think, if I recall, there was a shift a little bit in the 90s too that happened a little bit, right, Daniel?
Yeah, the popularity of the Black Heritage series really kind of opened the doorway for more inclusion of Black Americans in other stamp series, the Legends of Hollywood series, the American Music series that were ongoing at the time. And so the purpose of the Black Heritage series sort of shifted a little and began to focus less on, say, well-known civil rights leaders or politicians into people that weren't as well-known, but perhaps should be remembered and commemorated more broadly. And that's become sort of the calling card of the Black Heritage series over, let's say, the last 20 or so years is shining attention on the contributions of people who've been left out of mainstream history books.
So the pop culture icon stamps are also very popular. So what's special this year about the Betty White stamp, Lisa?
Sure. So like I said, we have gotten a lot of interest in the Betty White stamp. She was actually, while she was known as on the Golden Girls, she was actually a strong advocate for animal rights as well too. What I really love about this stamp, though, is what I call like an Easter egg. So for the most observant fans of the stamps, if you look really closely, you'll see something very special about that particular stamp.
I love that concept of Easter eggs. We see them all the time in movies, in photos, right? They're always a lot of fun. I myself in particular, I love the video game Easter eggs. I'm a video gamer. So, but Daniel, to your recollection, have we done something like this in the past with these Easter eggs?
There are a few well-known examples of secret marks hidden in postage stamps. It actually began in the 19th century when a lot of different contractors were producing stamps for the post office department, all of the stamps of the same design, printed by different contractors. And so they would put a little secret mark in the stamp so that the product of one company versus the other could be identified. But that was really for internal purposes, not meant to be discovered by the public. Then in the 1990s, there were some examples of little hidden Easter eggs in stamps. I remember one picturing a rabbi who had the Star of David hidden in his beard. And then there was a program actually from the late 90s and early 2000s where there were some images embedded in stamps that you needed a special decoder tool to be able to see. So there's a little bit of history of doing this, but it's largely been absent for the last 20 years. So it's fun to see it come back.
So let's talk about stamps commemorating the 250th anniversary of the American Revolutionary War. So Lisa, what do we have planned for that?
Sure. So there's a paint of stamps coming out related to the start of the war. That stamp is called The Battles of the American Revolution. It's a watercolor painting depicting scenes of 5 battles that appear alongside photographs of sites involved in each battle. As I mentioned earlier, with the country's 250th celebrating it next year in 2026, we wanted to at least start honoring or start coming out with stamps to really recognize that we're turning 250 as a country. So we'll have that one coming out this year and several more coming out in 2026.
Daniel, I'm thinking the Postal Museum must have something going on for the Postal Service's 250th anniversary. Are you able to share a little bit about what you're working on right now?
Sure. For the past several years, the museum's curators, myself and my colleagues, have been working on identifying all of the material in the museum's collection that is pre-1815. So the entire colonial, revolutionary, and early federal period. There's never been a comprehensive listing or inventory of what we have from that era. And so we've been compiling that. The museum's collections department has been conserving that material that we've identified and scanning it. And so I would expect over the next few years, as we commemorate the 250th anniversaries, that we'll see blog posts and websites and lots of other content that uses that material.
I can say that we're working very closely with the Postal Museum, both for celebrating USPS's 250th and US's 250th. So we're really excited about all the collaboration going on together.
I think it's so cool what you were talking about earlier, Daniel, about like trying to find those artifacts that predate, the 1850. What's the oldest stamp that you found in your collection?
Well, the oldest stamp anywhere in the world is from 1840, Great Britain, the penny black, the first postage stamp in the world. But for this project, the earliest paper artifact that we have in the collection is a receipt from 1687 for 10 shillings in money that was paid to the post rider on the Boston Post Road carrying mail between New York and Connecticut.
That was some find.
That is cool.
So one of the coolest things that I've seen and that we do every year is that we come out with stamps that really stand out because of their shapes. So you mentioned SpongeBob SquarePants. Can we assume that is going to be a square stamp?
You are right. It is a square stamp. So it's one of our fun stamps. And what I love about SpongeBob is it's so nostalgic. It crosses different generations as well, too. So it is really cute, the stamp that we have coming out. And it is, like you said, it is a square stamp. There aren't any triangular stamps coming out this year, but there will be a round stamp coming out this year. So we had a couple of round stamps last year in 2024. We will have another round stamp coming out in this year. It's the 1794, the Compass Rose stamp. So it's used for any country in which first class mail international service is available. So it's based on a notebook drawing made by the aunt of the famous poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And it's really a compass that really shows you how creative the work process can be coming up with the stamp.
Talking about the shape of these stamps, it really kind of seems like we kind of limit the number of these different shapes that we offer any given year, right? We don't really see too many of them. Daniel, maybe you can shed a little bit of light on this. Is there any historical reason for that?
Well, I think that when stamps were perforated in the more traditional way, it was a lot more difficult to change the shape of the perforating machine. It really only perforated in lines, in straight lines. But I think with the switch recently to stamps being die cut rather than actually perforated, holes punched in the paper, they're die cut now, and you just peel them off the liner, the backing. I think that's a lot easier to create different shapes and new perforation designs. So it's a part of it. Part of that is not just the aesthetic and the fun part of it, but it's the technological advances, I think, have made that a lot more easy.
So those, again, really creative approaches to the stamps. And it's good that we're seeing that continued creativity as we go into this year's lineup. Speaking of which, can you tell us about any new programs your team is launching to help postal customers looking to buy our latest stamps or even previously issued stamps?
So one of the most frequent complaints that I continue to hear from customers all the time is they hear the stamps announced on social media or press releases, and they get really excited. They go into our retail location and they ask for the stamp, and they can't find the stamp. So starting last year, what we've done, what we'll continue to do is actually have a QR code on our retail signage. And that's sort of been as you go into many stores nowadays, you notice a QR code, so you can actually shop online. So we're continuing that this year, where if a customer goes into our retail store, they can't find the stamp, there's a QR code that they can use, and it'll take them right to the postal store where they can order the stamp. So that makes it easier for customers to find these stamps, sometimes the older stamps that we don't have at the post office, they can find it online. We also launched within less than a year or so a new website called stampsforever.com. This is a site really dedicated to stamps and really dedicated to talking more about the stories behind the stamps. So it's a site where you can find a little bit more about how the stamp was designed, some of the key things or the exciting stories behind the stamps. And really it was built to create some excitement around the stamps for not only collectors, but also for the stamp enthusiasts.
So when we talk about making these stamps available, Are there limited quantities that are printed? Are these we can go back and pull it out and print it again if there's an ask? How does that work?
Yeah, so there are limited quantities that are created, and we rarely or seldomly ever reprint the stamps. So we take our best guess in terms of looking at similar stamps and how they've performed in the past, and use that to project out what stamps we should create. And I should just clarify that is for commemorative stamps. Mail use is a little bit different, like the flag stamps, for example. But when it comes to the commemorative stamps, we really do limit the amount that we produce. We also don't want to cannibalize, the stamps in the future year too. So we want to make sure that we can get the right number of stamps in the hands that are, for those who want it, but also be able to have, fresh stamps available for the next year.
One of the reasons we devote an episode every year to talking about our new stamp lineup is because it's exciting to talk about the new designs and, the unique stories behind each one of them. But another important reason is that the Postal Service does rely on stamps for a large part of its business every year. And as we know, except in very special cases, the Postal Service generally gets no direct funding from taxpayers. Lisa, can you give us a sense of more or less how much revenue our stamps provide the Postal Service each year?
So in 2024, stamps accounted for slightly more than $4 billion to the Postal Service, and we sold approximately a little bit more than 10.5 billion stamps. So it's still a pretty big number today.
That is staggering.
Absolutely staggering. Had no idea. Lisa, Daniel, it was great talking to you both today. I think it was an absolutely great conversation. I learned a lot about stamps in general and the awesome lineup that we have coming up for 2025. I appreciate you both coming in.
Definitely going to be looking for those new stamps. And just can we let folks know again where they can get a hold of their commemorative stamps or other mailing stamps?
Yep. So stamps are available on the Postal Store. If you go to USPS.com, the Postal Store. If you also go to the stampsforever.com website where you can find out more about the stories, there's a link there to the Postal Store to be able to buy the stamps. And then you can also go online. You can also go in retail to pick up your stamps. And we also have a catalog as well, too, that if you're interested, go onto the Postal Store or to stampsforever.com to sign up and get the catalog. You'll find out all of the new stamps and stamps-related products, stamp-inspired products that come out each year.
And Daniel, can you let our listeners know where the Postal Museum is located if they're visiting or they live in the area?
Online, the Postal Museum is at postalmuseum.si.edu. Here in Washington, D.C., we're on the corner of Massachusetts Avenue and 1st Street Northeast, right across from Union Station. So an easy train ride into Washington, D.C., and you can spend a day at the Postal Museum from just about anywhere in the Northeast Corridor.
Take it from me, you can easily spend a day there actually looking at all the stamps.
Well, thank you, Lisa and Daniel, for visiting. We look forward to having you back again.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Carla.
Carla, it is always such a pleasure speaking with Lisa to learn about the upcoming stamp lineup for the year. This year we actually got to talk to Daniel as well from the Postal Museum, which is amazing because, that adds a different perspective altogether. And there are just so many stamps coming out this year that are going to be amazing, right? The 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, the Betty White stamp, and then, hello, SpongeBob. Right? It's just a phenomenal lineup this year. And who knew that stamps could really be, it's such big business, right? What did Lisa say? More than $4 billion?
$4 billion in sales.
Yeah, just remarkable.
Definitely looking forward to the stamps, looking forward to the Heritage Series and the Lunar Year of the Dragon. Definitely will keep my eye out for that one. But also interesting to hear, limited quantities. So if people want the stamps, you need to get them as soon as they're available. Don't forget to visit USPS.com. You can visit the store to get those stamps. You can also check out your local retail office to find out what stamps they have available. Well, that's all for this episode of Mailin' It. Don't forget to subscribe to Mailin' It wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss any episodes. And follow along on Instagram at US Postal Service, X at USPS, and on Facebook.